All right, so I think three categories, three separate sets of question. Is grad school worth it? Should you opt for, should you go, should you try industry experience first? And then when, why, where should you go to grad school, right? So I think the first question you're trying to address is grad school worth it? And I think on that side, there are two separate categories. The first category is growth, which is personal and professional. And I think the second category is, so there are different aspects of growth. One is obviously certainly mindset, but I think there's another aspect which is financial impact of grad school. So let's first talk about the personal and professional growth part, right? Um, I think I've only gone to grad school once, right? But I've sort of advised people, I've sort of interviewed them for a while. And one key thing that I've noticed again and again is that grad school is essentially what you make it. So it's important where you go, right? It's important who your professors are. It's important which subject you've picked up. But I think the biggest driver in my mind is, are you going to grad school because you just want to get your ticket stamped that, oh, I went to grad school? Or are you going to grad school because you have a specific set of questions that you would like answers for? And I think this is key. So I often ask people, "Kyun ja rahe hain? Why are you going? Why are you exploring graduate school?" And there are multiple reasons. There are multiple responses that I hear. The most common is, I want to grow, I want to learn, I want to try, I want to sort of explore opportunities and options. Money is an aspect, professional career growth is an aspect, and there are other reasons also. But I think you would get the most out of grad school if you have specific questions in your field and you enroll yourself in a program that will not just help you answer those questions, but possibly maybe set you up on a path where you can explore this for a few years, not just in grad school, but also after grad school. So in my case, the example that I give is, for me, I think the big question that I wanted to answer was, why do certain businesses fail and why do other businesses succeed? So this was one big question. I think my second big question was, and this is something I discovered maybe before grad school, so I'd applied to it, I'd been accepted, and I was working, and I was wondering, why is it that there are certain businesses where people will work 10, 15, 20, or 30 years in the same business, for lack of a better word, but there are others where people will not last for more than 12 months. So what drives and defines that, right? So I think this was my first big question. कि ये कैसे होता है? I think my second big question was that I'd worked in technology. So I came from, my first degree was CS. I came from a tech background. I worked in a tech role. And at that specific point in time, not just in Pakistan, but across the world, I would say we were working on what you would call bleeding edge technology. And my second question was, why is it that we're working on bleeding edge technology and we're still not making money? Why are we still living hand to mouth? So what is wrong in our approach and in our model that needs to change? Now, did going to grad school answer or address these questions? That depends on how you look at it. So I think because I had these specific questions, I had a very clear path. And that path was, I would get answers to these questions in these courses, and possibly even from these professors. So my take was, so for example, I applied to MIT, and MIT had a MS MBA program, so a dual degree, where you sort of get a master's in science and you get an MBA. So I applied to that program. I think it was called Sloan Fellows. And the reason I applied to MIT for this specific reason was because MIT had this really outstanding product development professor who'd written the most brilliant book I'd ever read in my life on how do you take a product from essentially scratch or zero to commercial reality, right? And this was a very strong interest of mine. So my take was I want to go to MIT and I'm going to study with this professor. I've forgotten his name. If I'm not wrong, I think it was Professor Urban, maybe Glenn Urban or G Urban. And he was also the dean of the business school, right? So my take was, this is the guy that I'd love to study more from. So that was one specific aspect. Then there were a couple of other professors at MIT. So when I was working as a technology professional, there was a big book that came out, and it was a huge hit, and it was called Microsoft Secrets. And Microsoft Secrets focused on what is it that Microsoft has, both in terms of processes and mindset, that allows it to ship product after product after product. What is it that Microsoft has that's made it possible for them to create a layer of tech professionals that can ship products? And we may not be happy with those products, but they still have a huge track record of shipping, one hit after another. So not just the Windows operating system, but they essentially took the mantle. You think in terms of Microsoft, Microsoft basically came from behind. So yes, they had MS-DOS, but then DOS became Windows. But when it came to spreadsheets, the business that everybody used, the product that everybody used, was Lotus 123. And Excel, came out from nowhere to take the mantle from Lotus 123. That was one. If you think in terms of Word, there were two products, Word Perfect later on and Word Star. And once again, Word came out of nowhere to take the mantle from both Word Perfect and Word Star. In IDEs, integrated development environments, I was a hardcore, and not just me, but all of the Turbo C or Turbo C++ or Turbo Pascal, which was a product built by Boland. So Turbo C++, Turbo Pascal were built by Boland, and if you spoke to developers across the world, most developers would not be caught dead on a Microsoft IDE. And once again, they came out of the blue and took over with Visual C++. So they had this history, right, of building products that would just dislodge the competition, like a battering ram or a bulldozer. And it took them, the first product, the first few editions or versions did not do well at all, but the one that came afterwards did very, very well. So there was this gentleman, this professor also at MIT, who wrote a book called Microsoft Secrets. And to my mind, I think it was one of the best books I've read about how do you run a technology organization. And he was also a professor at MIT. So my take was, there are these really smart, sharp, bright guys at MIT. And, it would be really, really fun to sort of go study there. And it'll be like a mix. It's a good program. So it was essentially 2 degrees for the cost of one. So I'd get an MS and an MBA. It'll be fun. So that was my thinking at that specific point in time, right? That's what drove the process from my mindset. So now, if you spoke about the fact that this was the personal / professional growth part, from a financial point of view, there were lots of question marks. So the boss that I spoke to, and at the point that I was applying to grad school, I had about 4 to 5 years of professional work experience. And I had a secondary degree. So I was already an Associate Society of Actuaries, and I was taking my exams for the fellowship. And on this front, I think what was happening was that if I would finish my fellowship, the fellowship in a large part within the industry was the terminal degree. It's like a PhD in actuarial science, right? So if you get this done, you get the license to practice, but you also have a fair bit of credibility um, and influence in the industry because you've sort of been certified or stamped by the Society of Actuaries or by the Institute of Actuaries in UK. So I was already on my path to doing. I think I had one exam or two exams left at this point in time. So when I told my boss and this gentleman, himself was very well qualified, was very well respected, sat at the intersection of technology and system and actuarial science and accounting, and he was also a fellow. So when I first told him I'm thinking about applying to grad school, he said, Jawwad, look at the math. The math says that you are here right now. So this is the year 1997. And 1997, let's say I had 5 years of experience. So he said, if you go now, if you leave now, you will most likely get done maybe 1999, maybe 2000. And there's going to be this 3-year gap in your profile. And in those 3 years, what you'll find is that there are a lot of people who are going to, so if you, let's say you are here, so you started here, and because you started earlier, you were at this point here, and the people who started late and they are still far behind you on the curve. So because you had a head start, so you sort of move forward, and there are people who are behind you and people who are behind you. So mistake was, in those 3 years they will cross over and they will sort of step ahead of you. So this was one part. And then the second part is the part that was really more interesting. He said, if you finish your FSA, that's going to define your compensation. The MBA won't. So if you want to live in the US, live outside of Pakistan, the story is very different. But within Pakistan, the FSA is going to define your compensation, not the MBA. And then, obviously there's this big question of spending X amount of dollars, which you don't have. So you have to figure this piece out also, right? Where will the dollars come from? And I think these are the 3 or 4 considerations that were there at the background. Now, contrasting this were 2 other themes that I felt were really interesting at that stage. I think the first theme was that as a professional, if I looked at myself, and I'm now talking about 1996, 1997, my read was that from a technical point of view, so from a technical skill set point of view, I had the requisite skill sets. So that's not a problem. But when it comes to soft skills, when it comes to confidence, when it comes to sort of making a call on my own, especially big calls, so small calls I'd happily make, but if it was a question of a big call, I think I would have to think, I would always look beyond myself. I would look at others to help guide me and decide what was the right. I wasn't sure if what I was doing was the right thing, right? So this self-confidence, I think on my part was missing. This was one aspect. My second concern was I was very keen, very interested in running a business. So my thought process was, how do you do that? How do you actually run a business? I understand the technical side, but this business side is something that I've never really done. How do you do that? And my thought was, if I go to business school, maybe I get a sense of either direction or guidance or answers. So that's the context. That's the context in which I applied to business school. So what do you think? Obviously, because we've covered my story multiple times. You've read the book, you've read my exposure, you read my profile, you looked at my LinkedIn, my experience. So you have a sense of that I made this call, right? But if you were sitting in my place at this specific point in time, where I had a path, I was making a respectable amount of cash, I had respect and credibility from my team and from my employer and from my peers, did I need an MBA? Was that the right call? Especially, given the path that led to and everything that happened after that. Or would I have been better off if I'd stayed here in Pakistan and given up the option or not explored the option at all? क्या ख्याल है आपको? What do you think? And if you're concerned about the fact कि ये recorded session है और मैं कुछ और करूंगा, तो आप मुझसे रिक्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं कि सर ये मैं कमेंट कर रहा हूँ, ये ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड कमेंट, इसको प्लीज डिलीट कर दिएगा बाद में. I'll delete it later on. I think for some reason I can't see the chat. Zoom has this tendency of doing this to me now, especially on this machine. तो आपको बोलना पड़ेगा कि आप क्या कहना चाह रहे हैं. I think there were two things that made that call for me. One was a conversation that I had with another mentor, and in that conversation I think this mentor said to me, okay, if you go to one of these top 10 programs, they're a completely different volume. So, if you're going to a so-so program, the conversation is different. But if you go into one of these top 10 programs in their field, that just opens a very different set of doors. That'll never open for somebody who's gone to an okay program. And I think that sort of hit home to me. That was one aspect. I think the second aspect for me was that, जो आपने भी बात कही ना, you said that professionally my technical skill set was fine, but the path that I saw for myself, and I think this should give you a hint when we spoke about Microsoft. I was blessed by some really high quality and high grade teachers, and this blessing started all the way from एक जो बड़ा element and driver था. Despite the fact that I had been blessed with some really outstanding, some really good teachers, when I landed at Columbia, I'd done a few things. So in terms of business schools that I'd picked, every single school that I'd picked on my application were schools that gave me the flexibility to exempt out of what we call core courses. So the real value of these programs was not in core courses. The real value was in electives. Electives is where the action was, right? And I think this is advice that I sort of picked up when I was researching my programs, and when I was listening and looking and asking people about things that you would do or not do. This kept on coming up. You have to focus on the electives. The more electives you take, and the more sort of choice you have with respect to electives, the better your experience would be. So I'd exempted out of 5 core courses. So for the degree, the requirement was do 20 courses in total, of which 10 would be core and 10 would be elective. But for me, it was just 5 core and 15 electives. I think that really defined my experience, because the 5 new courses that I was able to take, those are all courses that were somehow linked to the questions I wanted to ask, somehow linked to the answers I was seeking, right? So that defined it. And then, with respect to faculty comes with very interesting profile. You might be a really world-class researcher, but you would be or could be a terrible teacher. Or you would have zero profile as a researcher from an academia point of view, but you would be a really, really outstanding teacher. So I think on the elective side also, there was a fair bit of diligence that had to be done, because you wanted to look at professors, you wanted to sort of investigate who you were working with or who you wanted to spend time with as far as classes were concerned. And that question is very opaque in the sense that not all schools and all programs give you the sense, not all programs expose the student rating or student feedback on faculty. Business schools did, right? So the MBA program did that. So when you registered or being enrolled, you knew who were the winners of the Excellence in Teaching Award. At Columbia, there was a grading system. They ranked professors out of a score of 7. So a course and a professor were both ranked on a grade of 7, and the 6s and 7s were the professors you wanted to take. So I think on the 15 electives I took, almost every single elective I took, the professor was ranked 6 and 7. And of the 5 cores I took, I think I had one really, really bad professor. Which sort of leads to the next question that, even at the top schools, even at the best schools, even at the biggest schools, you will find that there are going to be instances of bad teaching. Terrible teaching, in fact. And this is not an isolated instance. I think in the batch that we were part of, I think there were at least 2, possibly 3 professors where issues were raised by the student faculty all the way to the dean, saying that this gentleman or this individual or this person in question is not doing a good enough job. There are issues and challenges and they need to be addressed. Your question was, is it worth it? And my answer to that is, it depends. If you have questions that you'd like answers for, and you have a sense of where you'd find those answers, yes, it's worth it. If you're only going to get your ticket punch, because you see that as the next big step in your personal or professional growth, then that may be a question mark. It also depends on which school or program you pick and the faculty at that program. And then your experience with that faculty at that program, right? एक I think जो एक बहुत बड़ा difference है, वो difference ये कि if you think in terms of your own experiences, right? O's and A's were very different from your first few years at the university for your, let's say, bachelor's program. So, bachelor's of science program, right? Or a bachelor's of arts program. The grad school experience is going to be very different from your exposure and experience at the university level. Because at the grad school level, think about this for a second. When you say I want to do a master's, and let's say you want to do a master's in CS, how do you think the program is structured? So, good master's program, right? Great master's program, in most instances, or good, solid, great grad school professors are actually going to give you a high-level review of a framework or cases or instances, and then ask you to apply them to applications that are of either interest to you, of interest to them, or of interest to the world. Right? That's one part. Now, this is a program which is focused more on, let's say, exploration or research or some level of customization between, let's say, your interest, the school's interest, the professor's interest, or the field of study that you picked up and acquired. So, if you think in terms of similarities at the university level, when I give you something to study or read, or we cover something, in most instances you're given practice sets, right, or problem sets. And the idea behind these practice sets and problem sets is they sort of reinforce the learning for that specific topic in that specific class and course. But at the grad school level, it's not going to be about problem sets or practice sets. If I am teaching a grad school course, I'm actually going to go out and say, for example, I'm teaching a course on fintech right now, right? And my methodology in that specific course is going to be my methodology in that specific course is that I'm going to give them basic frameworks, and then from these frameworks I'm going to go out and ask them to apply the lessons learned to the local market. Could I do that in undergrad? Maybe I could do that at, let's say, at the final level, but I couldn't do that in your foundation level courses in your first year, second year. But I could certainly do that in the grad in the grad program. So this brings us back again to the same question: is it worth it? It depends. It depends on, do you have questions? It depends on the school you pick. It depends on the faculty you work with. It depends on what's your objective from the program. It depends on a number of factors. जब एक सवाल आता है, and this is a really interesting question, and this is a question around money. Would grad school actually make it possible for you to earn more? Right? यहाँ पे भी the जवाब is it depends. It depends. It depends on what? It depends on, how much has the grad school changed or transformed you? Do you have new skill sets that you didn't have before? Are those skill sets in demand? Or is it something very, very exotic that nobody's interested in, right? That's one part. Or, have you stayed the same? You've gotten better at what you do to some extent, but there's been no significant immediate possible transformation. So if the grad school has been a transformational experience for you, then I think it'll certainly help you earn more. That's one aspect. It also goes back to this question again: which school, which faculty, which question, and which market. And then there are certain programs that sort of open doors and opportunities, not just in your local market, but also in regional and international markets. And there are other programs that will have no such impact. So I think one of the questions that you have to think about is, you're going to spend, it's not just about the fees you're going to pay to go to grad school. It's also about the opportunity cost. You will spend somewhere between 12 months to 24 months studying full time, not earning a wage. And the question you have to answer is this investment worth it? So this investment is worth it if it's a transformation experience. Investment's worth it if you've sort of picked up useful, in-demand skill set. Investment's worth it, if you sort of stepped up, if you've grown beyond who you are right now. Investment's worth it if you understand where your biggest weaknesses are, right? And how could grad school possibly fix them for you on your behalf? So in all of these instances, yes, it would be worth it. But if you sort of haven't figured this out as yet, you're just saying, I'm going to go and explore and find out, then that discovery exercise may pay off if you sort of head off in the right direction, or it may not pay off if you sort of come out of the program just as you went in. देखिए, undergrad में doesn't make too much of a difference, but at grad school it makes a huge difference. And उसकी I think multiple reasons हैं. मैं आपको एक example देता हूँ. I did coursework with 3 professors, actually multiple professors, but 3 professors that are big instances. मेरी एक जो field है, which is my specialization, is computational finance. ठीक है? Computational finance में there are many people, but there are 2 very big names. One is Paul Glassman and the other is Mark Brody. अब Mark Brody की strength क्या है? Mark Brody की strength और specialization ये है कि Mark Brody used to work for Lehman Brothers. And Mark had a PhD in operational research. So he built, pricing systems on mainframe for Lehman. And then the course that he taught, and hum baat karein, we're talking about 1999. And in 1999, Mark had already been teaching for multiple years at Columbia. What Mark basically did said, these big, huge programs that we wrote on mainframe systems, what if we implemented them in Excel? So using this, then you basically have a good sense of whatever you do on the mainframe just on Excel. And this one course, right? This one course completely changed my mindset. It also completely changed my understanding of the field. मैं आपको एग्जांपल और देता हूँ उसके अंदर. we still talking about Mark. So ये जो मेरी computational finance की field है, इसमें मैं कैसे आया? इसमें मैं ऐसे आया because I became an actuary by profession, and actually my specialization was investment. And investment में there was a paper that was called D480 that dealt with pricing derivative securities. And इसमें एक textbook थी, इसका नाम था Options and Other Derivatives by John C. Hull. So जब आप when you gave these exams for the Society of Actuaries, to pass an exam, you basically had to finish the curriculum about 6 times. This was sort of like a golden rule. If you covered the curriculum 6 times, you would get a passing grade, and the passing grade was 6 out of 10. Anything less than a 6 was a F or a fail, right? So you take the course, you read the books 6 times, you sort of do the past papers a couple of times, you sort of practice on the practice sets, and if everything sort of worked well, then you'd be able to pass this course. So I flunked this course D480 3 times. What does that mean? That basically means that I read John C. Hull and the other books prescribed reading in the specific course 18 times. So now if you think about this for a second, if you read something 18 times, you would assume that it would become a lot more understandable to you, right? So I read this 18 times and I was really sure that I understood everything there was to be understood about John C. Hull. फिर क्या हुआ? फिर I ended up working at Goldman. And Goldman में there was one of the colleagues I was working with had a PhD in finance. And she came at things from a very different perspective. And my thought was, कि ये कैसे हुआ? Where does this understanding or this insight or this thinking comes from? And that sort of got me interested in seeing, okay, I'd like to take at least 1 or 2 PhD finance courses. So when I got to Columbia and I sort of exempted out of the 5 core courses and I had 5 electives to pick from, I was going through the curriculum, and in that curriculum there was a course being taught by Maria Vasalu. हमारे पास फिर कागज खत्म हो गया है, हम इधर आ जाते हैं, right? Yeah, so Maria taught a course called Continuous Time Finance. And I brazenly walked into Maria's Zoom and I said, I've done Hull 18 times. I'm almost a fellow Society of Actuaries. I worked in Goldman before I came here. So मुझे तो सब कुछ आता है. I know everything. There is to know about the subject. And Maria said, listen, it's a very tough course, very difficult course. Every year somebody like you comes along and says, yeah, I know everything about this course and I'm going to do very well in it. And then at the end of that term or that semester, there's a huge crisis because this person is flunking the course, right? And then we have to figure out what can we possibly do to sort of help him. So I'm tired of this. I'm not going to do this. This year, if you sort of get stuck or you have an issue or you have a problem, then you will get an F. And that's the only condition under which I'd let you enroll the course. I said, all right, I've done Hull 18 times. I'd be perfectly fine. But when I started the course, I had no clue. Because, AIC is your bachelor's or your undergrad course, AIC is your MS or master's course, and AIC is your PhD course. The level of complexity in these courses, the depth and substance that sort of increases from one level to the next is just phenomenal. So I was lost at sea. So ye Maria hogi. And then it was only when I took the class with Mark Brody that everything I'd done with Hull in those 18 readings finally clicked and came together. It was only when I took the class with Mark Brody that the stuff Maria was trying to teach us sort of started to make sense. And to me, that understanding changed my life. So, you asked me, does it make a difference? It makes a huge difference on who you work with. I think if I hadn't studied or taken those courses with both Maria Vasalu and Mark Brody, my understanding of the field would be very limited. My understanding of how things work would be very limited. But more importantly, everything that I've done in the last 20 years, I wouldn't be able to do because I did not or would not possess that level of comprehension which was a requirement in that specific field. And I'd say to a large extent, all of this happened because of not just Maria, not just Mark Brody, but also because of a third professor, and his name was Harvey Cobb. But I ran into these three people because they were not just at Columbia, but because Columbia was in New York, and New York was sort of the center of the world when it came to Wall Street, when it came to finance, when it came to computational finance. So I think this is a really important aspect that we often struggle with, that we don't think about. You're going to spend 2 years of your life working on something. You might as well work with people who know what they're doing and with people who can teach you something. And this last line, people who can teach you something, is really, really key, because there are professors who are not interested in teaching. For them, teaching is a burden, right? And because of multiple reasons, because they've got huge research grants, because they're very important to the school and the university and the program, they don't have to invest as much on the teaching side. And then there are professors who've done so much interesting work that, if one conversation with them can completely change your mindset and your outlook. So look for these professors, look for universities where these professors exist, and then see, where that takes you. I think there was one more question that came out. And that question was, I had a terrible GPA. So my graduating GPA, my graduating GPA was 2.8. Actually, to be fair, it was 2.78 out of 4.0. And there were multiple reasons for that, right? There were multiple reasons for that specific experience, but the fact remained that 5 years later, when I was applying to business school, I had a GPA of 2.78 out of 4. Now, how was this offset? It was offset by the fact that I already had 5 years of experience, and in that 5 years experience, I had progressive responsibilities. So this was one. 2, my GMAT was 680. I'm not sure what the total score was. I think it was 680 out of 800. Yeah. 680 out of 800 doesn't mean anything. What does mean, what is important, is that this translated into a 94 percentile score at that point in time, because I took the GMAT, I think, in 1997. So 1997, a 680 out of 800 would be 94 percentile. So second cheese here. The third thing was, my recommendations. So I had great recommendations from people that I'd worked with, and I think those recommendations counted for a lot. The fifth part was what we call your personal statement. So personal statement was strong. That also makes sense. Achha, so I think, the first part, the first set of questions we had dealt with, is it worth it, right? There we go. Is grad school worth it? So I've sort of tried to answer this. I hope I've answered it. If you have more questions in and around it, ask them now before we move on to the next stage, which is, the story about industry experience, or the discussion around industry experience. No, so I think the big benefits that you have is that there are lots of scholarships available, right? So there are UK specific scholarships, there are European scholarships, and there are US scholarships. And I think you need to sort of do your due diligence on that specific front, कि कौन सी scholarship किस खाते में कब मिलेगी, और इसके साथ आप क्या कर सकते हैं. Some scholarships work in that sense that they first qualify you, and then say, we're going to sort of hook you up or link you up with these schools. Others basically say that, you apply to the program. If you're admitted, we sort of pay for your experience and your exposure. But you have to think about this. There are two types of scholarships. There are scholarships that are focused on Pakistan. right? And there are scholarships that focus on the colleges and the universities, right? So, for example, Columbia has a scholarship fund, but that scholarship fund comes with its own conditions and restrictions and requirements. So, if you're applying to Columbia or Stanford or MIT or Harvard or California or Caltech or UCLA or Chicago, right? Each of these programs have some kind of a scholarship structure available for international students, or they're very very clear and they say we have nothing available for international students, right? So then this college slash university focus program debate ends. The Pakistan focused scholarships are going to be easy to qualify for because you're competing against a different pool and they have a larger number available. So my take is, so when I'd applied, funding was not an option, and there were lots of other issues and questions and challenges and problems. But compared to 20 years ago now, the environment is very, very different. So I'm saying there is money available. You have to sort of seek it out, look for it, find out where it is, and then see if that sort of makes it work for you. Did that answer your question? Yeah. अच्छा जी, अच्छा अब जो एक सवाल है आपका वो है that deals with industry exposure, industry experience, right? यहाँ पे my recommendation is that when you work in your field, that's the real true test of whether you want to work in that field or not. You know, for example, if you look at my journey is when I finished my bachelor's, it was a BCS, right, from FAST. All I wanted to do was a master's in computer science. If you'd asked me, Jawwad, you know, what do you want to do? What would you do if money was not a problem, money was not an issue? Where would you go? My standard response would have been, I'd do a master's in CS. If you said, Jawwad, would you do an MBA? I'd say, are you out of your mind? Never. I would never do that. Lekin after working for 5 years, there were a few things that sort of become clear. I really enjoyed programming. And in certain aspects of programming, I think I was very, very good. But I didn't have the discipline. I didn't have the patience to see things through. This was one part. Second thing was I enjoyed the management part a lot more. So I could code, I could function, I could work, but there was no assurance, there was no guarantee that I'd be able to complete or deliver what was assigned to me. And then I got to a stage where I became the bottleneck because I'd take on a bit of the assignment. I'd say, listen, I'd take care of this much. Why don't you guys do the rest? But because I'd get so occupied with the project management aspect of it that I would never have time to finish it. And then my team would say, listen, Jawwad, you're not doing this. This is not going to get done. Might as well give it to us. And then they got to a point that every time I'd tell them, okay, listen, guys, I'll do this. They say, no, you're not going to do this. We'll do this. We know how this movie ends. We've seen this multiple times before. Okay? So 5 years later, I was very clear. Okay, for me, the focus was not going to be CS. That's not where my problems and challenges were based. I think I needed to do something else. And in that something else, I think the two areas that I was really interested in were product management and what I call technical organization. Why do certain businesses and organizations do well and others don't, right? And these two areas of interest would essentially only make sense in a business school environment and context. They would not make sense in a pure CS program. So then I said, okay, then I'll apply to an MBA. And then when the time came to the MBA, then the issue was, okay, which school? And again, the advice that I'd gotten multiple times from multiple sources was, if you're going, go to a top school. If you're not going to a top school, then don't bother. Then wait. Then be patient. Top schools matter. It's not just about faculty. It's not just about brand. It's not just about network. It's also about the type of people you work with, And not all of them are going to be smarter, sharper, and brighter, but you will be in good company. If you're lucky, you'll be in great company. You will end up working with or engaging with or interacting with colleagues that are going to help you step up your own game. So the point that I want to make with respect to industry experience is, when you studied at the university, you studied it under different set of conditions. When you work in the same field, that's when you find out what you're going to do with your own hands. One, whether you like it. Two, whether there's a future in it for you. Three, and are you going to get bored with it? Four, right? So these are all things that you only find out if you work in the industry. Now there are two parts to this, right? One part is, if you work in the industry, I think somebody asked this earlier, can you actually step out of it? It's difficult, it's challenging, it's a problem. But if you want to grow, and if you have, ultimately what are we saying? What we're really saying is, what the industry experience gives you, there we go, Microsoft secret. What the industry experience gives you is questions. And the question with questions is, how badly do you want an answer? So if it's sort of driving you mad, then you figure out a way to go to grad school. And if it's just like a slight itch that you can ignore because it's not doing anything to you or to your head, you say that's fine. It's okay. If I don't get the answer to this question, I don't mind. I don't have a problem. It's not the end of the world. But if you if it's sort of really getting under your skin, then it's, I need to go someplace and figure this out. Otherwise, I can't function. I can't cope. It cannot work. It's not just self-awareness that you pick up from industry experience. It's also curiosity. What is the area of study that you want to explore? What are the questions that you want to answer and ask? My tuition at Columbia was about $15,000 per term. If I took 5 courses, that was about $3,000 per course. I think the Mark Brody course cost $3,000. How much do you think I generated in income over the last 20 years from that specific course? When I say income, I'm saying billing. I'm not saying profit. I'm not saying money I've made, money that I have in the bank. If over the last 20 years, opportunities, client engagements, billable work, which obviously had its own cost because, it was not just me working on it, right? But we got that work simply because, I understood something that Brody had done for us. Right? How much do you think I was able to sort of leverage or generate from this $3,000? You close, but not close enough. You missed a zero. If I look at billing, that's directly attributable to Mark or Mark's courses. And okay, so it's not fair. It's not just Mark, right? It was also Maria Vasalu that helped a big deal, and it was also Habib University that also helped, right? And then there were a couple of other professors from both strategy and finance. So there was Don Sexton on international marketing. There was Ralph Pigadike on strategy. There was John Whitney with In Search of the Perfect Prince. Right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there were other professors. There were other professors also, right? But in this specific area, right? Also Glenn Howard with e-finance. So check. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 courses. If you take these 6 courses, that's about $18,000. So $3 million return over 20 years on $18,000 investment. Is that a good deal or a bad deal? Yeah. But again, it's a function of part of it is luck, part of the fact that Mark was a great teacher, part of the fact, it was also there was a lot of luck and timing involved, right? So it was Maria Vasalu, then Mark, then Harvey, right? And then all of these guys on the side. All of that made a difference. But there's a second aspect of it, and that's the second aspect. Right? The problems that interest you today, Mazia, are, let's say, image processing. The problem that interested me when I was graduating from school? It was neural networks. And remember, this is 1992. There's no internet. The only thing that we had access to was Byte magazine. I think there was not even a single book in the FAST library on neural networks at that point in time. And there was no internet. So with that, how do you sort of learn or figure out what needs to be done? But despite the fact I was interested in neural networks, I think by the time I was done with the work I was doing, my interest had shifted to what you call computational finance. And it was something that I found very, very hard and challenging and difficult. And I'd say, even after my year and a half, so let's just call it 2 years, even after my 2 years at Columbia, this didn't sort of become something that I was making money with. It was only when I came back to Pakistan in 2003 that a series of events led to opportunities that made it possible for us to monetize that, right? So from neural networks in 1992 to computational finance in, let's say, 2003, that's about 11 years. So what interests you today, which is image processing, let's say, I'm sort of being presumptuous, may not be what interests you 3 years down the road. I've been paying attention in class. All right. आपने मेरे साथ classes ली ना? We did about what, 2 months of live classes, in-person classes last year. हाँ मतलब सर, हाँ दो महीने, right? We did about 2 months of classes, right? And when you compare those 2 months of classes with the next 4 months of online classes, was there a difference? Which one was better, the live one or the online one? एक element ये है. Second element क्या है? Second element ये कि it's not just online and live. मैं आपको एग्जांपल और देता हूँ. वो एग्जांपल अगेन, ये सब चीजें मुझे एडिट करनी पड़ेंगी because these are not things I should say publicly, especially on YouTube, right? 1992. So 1992 मैंने काम स्टार्ट किया, right? 1992 मैंने काम स्टार्ट किया. 1993 में I sort of graduated and became, at 92 I graduated, 93 I started work. So 93 से 1997, ठीक है? So I worked for about 4 years, and I was a smart, sharp, bright, articulate, presentable, hardworking, respected member of the team at the employer I worked for. अब जिस employer के साथ मैं काम करता था, उनके पास there were multiple partners, and I'm just going to put names. So this is partner number 1, this is partner number 2, this is partner number 3, and this is partner number 4, and then there was 5 and 6. Right? So these are all essentially directors who sort of ran the business. So I used to work, my reporting line was with 3, and my relationship was also with number 3. But with 1 and 2, especially with 1, right, because 1 was the senior most partner in the firm. With 1, when we would knock on his doors, our knees would knock. हमें डर लगता था, दरवाजे पे खटखटा देगा. And जब हम अंदर जाके बात करते थे, when we would speak to him, we would stutter, we would sort of, it'd be like how quickly can I get out of this room? And he was really nice and very sweet guy, but the fact of the matter still remained that, from a perception point of view, from an image point of view, from a standing point of view, he was here and we were here. तो वो यहाँ पे थे और हम यहाँ पे थे. There was a huge difference in terms of where we were. So, एक element ये था. I think जो एक second element था, वो second element ये था कि when we would get visited by customers from outside Pakistan, I would always think कि they must have some kind of an edge. They must have some kind of an advantage. There must be something that I am missing or that we are missing that sort of leads to a situation where we can never be better than the people I'm sort of working with or quoting or talking to. तो ये जो 1999 में discovery का process start हुआ, right? Start off first with going and working at Goldman and then starting at Columbia. This discovery process got to a point where when I came back in 2003, the Jawwad that went in 1997, 1998 was very different from Jawwad that came back in 2003. ये चीज खत्म हो गई. This was done. I still remember there was this incident that I have in mind. I was working for a client in LA, and this was a very large bank. It was actually one of the largest banks on the planet at that point in time. And we were sitting with the executive committee, and one of the members of the executive committee made a statement which I knew was not true. It was not an issue. And the Purana me, the Purana Jawwad, would have stayed put. Or even if I'd opened my mouth and said, "Ki ji, aap galat keh rahi hain, there's a problem here, there's an issue here," I would not be able to sort of engage this individual properly, because there was again a huge gulf. It's the same thing as partner number one and me over here. So I said, I have a comment to make. And this person, she said, what would that be? And I said, you just said this, but it's not true. And she said, oh, I've spent 30 years in banking, and you spent 0 years in banking, and you're going to tell me how to run my business. This is exactly the tone which that statement was made, right? And this is not just me and her and a couple of people. This is the entire executive team of that specific bank, and our team sitting on this side. And I said, I'm not saying that the experience that you have and the experience that I have are similar or comparable. I'm simply pointing out that there's an issue here. And she said again, and what would that be? And I said, this is the issue. And she looked at me, and the entire room looked at me. And she said, or one of her colleagues said, we never looked at it from this perspective and this point of view. And you're right. So if you'd asked me कि 1997 में 1998 में आप ये हरकत कर सकते थे, I would have said no. I would have also responded very differently. I would have also engaged very differently. So all of this changed how? This changed essentially not because of the fact that I read the book, or I did the coursework, or I listened to the recording of the professors. It was essentially because of the engagement that happened in that classroom. Okay, I agree with you. Okay, there's an enormous amount of material available on OpenStack. Agreed. Done. Your challenge is you're smart enough, you're sharp enough, you're bright enough to sort of decode it all, to work through it, to do everything. I won't stop you from doing that. I'm saying aap karte rahe, us pe kaam karte rahe. But it's just like me reading Hull 18 times. I read Hull 18 times, some of it sunk in, some of it I understood, but it's only when Brody put it together, right? When Brody walked us through his models, that's when the connections were made. So I won't discount good professors. Good professors can change your life. And the very best one, when you're in their class, you would say, I wish I'd met this person before in my field. It would have saved me so much time, so much energy, so much pain. And the best of them are very humble, very accessible, and very approachable. And it's not so much a question of it'll be that something meaningful will come out of that relationship. It's just a question of that your engagement with professionals in your field. It's like when I tell people I did coursework with Mark Brody, for the people who know who Mark is, or I did coursework with Maria Vasulu, right? People who know who she is. For them that means a great deal. कुछ चीजें जो क्लासरूम एनवायरनमेंट में, अब क्लासरूम एनवायरनमेंट इज आल्सो क्वेश्चन मार्क राइट ना बिकॉज ऑफ कोविड, सो वी डोंट नो कि अगर आप बाहर जाएंगे पढ़ेंगे भी तो आपको क्लास मिलेगी नहीं मिलेगी. But my take would be that there are certain things that come out of these relationships and these engagements, and they make a big difference. There are certain things that you learn, certain things that you sort of pick up in your engagements with your classmates. There's a Ralph Bigdike, right? Bigdike ka to intikal ho gaya, he's dead. But he was such a phenomenal strategy professor, and I still remember. मैं और मेरे एक और colleague, both of us said that we don't want to take the strategy course because we worked in consulting for 5 years. हमें सब आता है. So we actually went all the way to the dean. He said, I've done 5 years in consulting. He's done 20 years in consulting. We understand this. ये क्या पढ़ा देंगे हमें? And the dean said, no, you have to take the course. So now we were very, very lucky that we got Ralph as a professor. And Ralph's take on strategy was so different. It was so structured. It was so clear that everything that I'd read on strategy in 15 or 20 years was just put aside. Because Ralph sort of cut through the clutter and said, this is what you need to focus on. So अगर आपको अच्छा प्रोफेसर मिल जाए, आपको अच्छा टीचर मिल जाए, if you find somebody who is really, really good at what they do, right? And you're lucky enough and fortunate enough to sort of be there in that classroom with them, it's a completely different experience. अच्छा, एक और सवाल था. I think there was one more question that dealt with, is it easy for a CS major to switch to a master's in business? I don't think there are any issues. कुछ minor चीजें that you're going to struggle with when you sort of start the coursework, but the program assumes that that's going to happen. So they create the program with that in mind, and that shouldn't be a challenge, shouldn't be a problem. So if I go back to our original list, on our original list of questions, we had, there we go. We had, is grad school worth it? So we tried to answer that. Is the industry experience recommended? The answer is yes. And then the when, why, where should you go to grad school? I think I just have one comment, and that comment is, you have to be cognizant of the academic and teaching environment in different countries. So North America is 3 countries. It's Mexico, it's the US, and it's Canada. But these are 3 very different academic environments and 3 very different academic experiences. And North America itself is very, very different from UK. And UK and North America are very, very different from Europe. And then within Europe, Germany is different, Finland is different, Norway is different, Austria is different. And then all 3 of these, all 4 of these, all of that part is very different from the Far East, which is Singapore. And Singapore is very different from Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is very different from Australia, and Australia is very different from Japan. They're not the same. The experience is not the same. The engagement is not the same. The outlook, the approach, the mindset is not the same. And so a lot of times we hear that a CS program is the same whether it's a CS program in Switzerland versus a CS program anywhere else. You have to look at faculty. You have to look at where faculty went to school. You have to look at faculty's research interest. You have to look at faculty's writing. You have to look at whether the faculty has written any books. So if they've done research papers, that's separate. If they've written textbooks, that's separate. If they've written textbooks that are in our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, that is a very, very different thing, right? So you have to look at this. You also have to look at what do people say about their teaching expertise. You should actually find out, just do a Google search on their name and hear them speak, and they'll give you a sense of how they teach, what their teaching style is, how do they approach. Do you actually understand what they're saying? Can you comprehend what they're saying? Are they approachable? Are they accessible? And nothing should stop you from dropping them a note. I'm a student in Habib University in Pakistan. I saw your paper, I saw your book, I saw your talk, I saw your speech. I loved it. I just had a follow-on question. I was wondering if you have the time to answer that. Don't be pushy. Don't be in your face. Be polite. Be to the point. See if there is value that you create in that engagement. and see where that goes. So keep that in mind. Schools everywhere are different, academic teaching environments are different, approach and outlook is different, and then accordingly job prospects are different. I think हम लोग ये बात करते, we used to ask each other this question, and I think the answer was always the same. So if you want to work on the East Coast, go to a school on the East Coast. If you want to work on the West Coast, go to a school on the West Coast. If you want to work either on the East Coast or on the West Coast, and you're only going to that program because you want to sort of learn, study, grow, expand your horizons, that's also fine. But geographic locations also determine where your post-grad job opportunities would be. Recruitment is easier when it's in and around campus. It's very difficult if you have to fly across continents. So bear that in mind, keep that in mind. ठीक है जी, anybody else? Any other questions? Any other issues? I hope this was useful. सवालात? The money exercise. A lot of you think in terms of हमने मास्टर्स कर ली, फिर मास्टर्स के बाद हम अमेरिका में होंगे तो हमें लाख, सवा लाख, 1.5 लाख, 2 लाख डॉलर का पैकेज मिल जाएगा. So, how far does $200,000 actually go in the US? And what portion of that $200,000 will actually fall into your pocket? What portion will sort of go away in terms of taxes? And what portion you'll never see for the rest of your life? That's also an interesting question, but I think that we'll sort of save that for our next session. Shabash. Okay, so there are no more questions. There were just comments on Usaid's question. Okay, so with that, I hope this was useful. I thought I'd just start a conversation with some of you because there were some interesting comments that popped up in my last class with my students, and I thought this would be useful insight. If this is useful, if you have more questions and more queries on this specific subject and topic, I'm happy to set up one more session, maybe a few months down the road, when we sort of thought through this and have follow-on questions after this. So with that, let's see if we can finish.